left. Terrain. We're turning. Up.
They said follow our instruction. If you don't, we'll blow the airplane up. That's it.
This is a tragic moment for Lufthansa. And it's really a dark day in our history.
Flying thousands of feet in the air means putting your life in the hands of your pilots. But what happens when they're no longer able to control the aircraft? Hey guys, Jared here, and today we're looking at some of the scariest aviation disasters. If the plane you're on begins to fill with water, why might your life vest actually be your greatest death trap? How did pilots land a plane when they lost power to all their controls? And why did some blame German lawmakers for a crash that killed over 150 people? To make sense of these accidents, I spoke with Melanie A. Folcik-Barillaro. She's a senior aviation accident investigator, a pilot, and a certified flight instructor. She helped us unpack exactly what went wrong and somewhat calmed my fear of flying.
Being in a plane is risky activity. Fear and panic can paralyze people.
First up, a story where a safety measure cost the lives of hundreds.
Open the damn door! Come on! Move!
It's March 24th, 2015. You board Germanwings Flight 9525, traveling from Barcelona, and expect to land in Dusseldorf, Germany in about 2 hours. There are 6 crew members, including the pilots, and 144 passengers. The plane takes off at 10 a.m., slowly gaining altitude. Things are going according to plan. The captain, Patrick Sondenheimer, steps out of the cockpit to use the bathroom around 10:30 a.m., leaving co-pilot Andreas Lubitz in control. Then the plane rapidly descends and your stomach drops. What the heck is going on? A few minutes later, the captain starts pounding on the cockpit door. He tries a manual override on the keypad, but with no luck. You start to panic and notice the other passengers around you are also worried for their lives. Out the window, you can see the mountains getting closer and closer. And then, it's all over. At 10:41 a.m., the plane crashes into a mountain range in southern France, killing everyone on board. Did something happen to the co-pilot? Was he unconscious? Or was this his plan all along?
Now a recording from that battered black box recovered from the wreckage may reveal the shocking, horrible truth. This tragedy was apparently no accident.
An investigation into the crash determines that the plane's co-pilot, Lubitz, intentionally crashed the plane. But why? First, we need to understand who Lubitz was. In 2008, he joined Lufthansa's pilot training program, but just a year later, he took a break. It turned out he needed to undergo treatment for psychological problems and suffered from severe depression. Around this time, he considered suicide and was hospitalized.
The prescription was there, but the doctor assumed that Andreas Lubitz would go of his own free will. In theory, he could have been hospitalized by force.
In July 2009, he was declared entirely healthy and issued a medical certificate that had to be renewed annually. For a while, things seemed to be okay. 4 years later, Lubitz became a co-pilot. But in December 2014, he started to complain about vision problems and a sleeping disorder. He was then diagnosed with a psychosomatic disorder. In other words, he was suffering physical symptoms from a mental problem. Just a month before the crash, Lubitz was given a sick certificate, prescribed medication for insomnia and depression, and was referred to a psychiatric hospital due to possible psychosis. But all of this was kept from the airline, only discovered after the crash, when investigators found traces of the medication in his system and torn up sick notes. However, that's not all they found.
It was almost by chance that we found it, just going through all the debris. At some point, someone found the flight data recorders.
The black box data showed Lubitz had repeatedly programmed the plane to enter a sharp descent, like a rehearsal. It also had a recording. Lubitz was silent and breathing normally throughout the whole ordeal, while the captain screamed to be let in.
Open the door! Lubitz!
The captain was, of course, desperate to getting into the cockpit. And he knew that this descent was continuing.
Because of the 9/11 terror attacks, many airlines made important safety updates, but some of them had unforeseen consequences.
After 9/11, what we were trying to do is make sure the bad guys couldn't get into the cockpit, so they reinforced the door to where you couldn't even blow it off the hinges.
There was a keypad code to get in, but that could be overridden by whoever was in the cockpit. Just days before the crash, Lubitz's internet history included ways to die by suicide and information on the cockpit door's security system. Given his history, you may be wondering why Lubitz's doctors didn't notify the airline of his condition out of caution.
In the German system, doctors can potentially face prosecution if they breach their patients' medical confidentiality.
In an effort to support the victims' families, Lufthansa, the parent company of Germanwings, offered the equivalent of $59,000 US to their relatives. This incident also led to the rule of two in airline cockpits, requiring 2 crew members in the cockpit at all times. Although it was implemented internationally, some countries lifted the rule in 2017.
When this happened, there was a lot of feedback as to why would a flight attendant be up there if they have no flight training safety? And the thought was, well, to give access to the other pilot that is trying to enter the flight deck. And I think the pushback questions that came from it were, well, what if that person that has locked themselves in the flight deck now incapacitates the flight attendant because they are on a mission? So now we have 2 folks that are down. And in cases like that, there's just no way to get around that.
Was there anything the passengers could have done to survive?
Not in this case. I think the aircraft descended too quickly. The rapid descent happened. The door was locked. There were no safeguards in place. So in this case, no.
But what should you do if you're forced to crash in the middle of the ocean?
He knew that he was going to have to ditch the airplane. He was going to have to put the airplane down in the water. How he was going to do that was now a different plan because he'd never been trained to do that, not with 2 engines out.
On November 23, 1996, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 was expected to fly from Ethiopia to the Ivory Coast. The first 20 minutes went according to plan.
And then I saw a guy sort of flitting up quietly and slowly up the way, and I said, uh-oh, this looks like some sort of coordinated effort. Must be a hijacking.
What happened next led to one of the deadliest airline hijackings of all time. 3 suspicious men get out of their seats and storm the cockpit, claiming to have a bomb.
Get out. Get out!
They give him an ultimatum. Fly to Australia, or they detonate a bomb.
These 3 gentlemen that hijacked the aircraft were looking for asylum, and they thought that they could get to Australia.
Captain Lael knows this is impossible. They don't have enough fuel. He tells them they'll need to refuel, but they think he's bluffing.
The policy at that time was we should follow the hijacker's instruction. That was before 9/11. And every action taken is to be taken on ground, not in flight. Pilots are trained to fly, not to fight.
Prior to this incident, the captain had been the victim of 2 other hijackings. In 1992, 2 men stormed the cockpit with hand grenades, demanding to be taken to Canada from a Kenyan airport. In 1995, 5 men hijacked a domestic flight in Ethiopia, redirecting it to Sudan. Okay, wow. The fact that he survived 2 hijackings already and kept flying is pretty brave. I'm not gonna lie. I'd probably quit after the first one, but hey, kudos to the captain. In both cases, everyone survived, and the hijackers were apprehended. Sadly, Captain Lael's 3rd hijacking experience didn't end as peacefully.
I said, if you don't want to reach your aim, and if you want to die in the air, why do we have to kill all those innocent people? They said, never mind, we're making history.
Lael talks to air traffic control to try and prove his point about the lack of fuel, but it doesn't work. They continue to fly over the ocean toward Australia, and then, out of desperation, the captain goes on the intercom and tries to signal to the passengers for help without alerting the hijackers.
I ask all passengers to react to the hijackers. Thank you.
Maybe his wording wasn't direct enough, but no one gets the hint. Shortly after, he tells the plane to brace for impact.
A few alert people, maybe a few people that spoke Ethiopian might have been able to understand, but then how are they going to communicate that to the rest of the passenger load in that fuselage? I just think it would have been very difficult.
Just 300 feet north of Grande Comore, France, the plane plunges into the ocean.
Well, one of the things the captain did very right was he landed parallel with the waves. So he landed between them instead of perpendicular, so he was kind of riding it like a surfboard.
At first, the plane skims the water. Passengers feel a bump, and it feels like it might be a smooth landing.
Then the second bump was like a 30-mile-an-hour auto accident.
I had a feeling the plane was not going to hold.
Then, it violently flips over. Water rushes in. Passengers inflate their life jackets, but it's too soon.
Everybody activated their life preservers, and as that fuselage filled with water, it pushed all of the individuals up to the roof and pinned them to the roof like floating water bottles. You cannot get out when you have that much air trapped around your neck. So they unfortunately perished. I want to say it was between 60 and 80 people died just because of that.
Those who survive hold their breath and manage to swim out with deflated life jackets. In total, 125 people died, including the hijackers. It turned out they didn't actually have a bomb and instead relied solely on the makeshift weapons available in the cockpit to hold the pilot hostage. A report following the incident led to safety recommendations, including storing the emergency fire axe in a place that passengers can't get it. I don't know about you guys, but this one just seems painfully obvious, no? Of the survivors, 44, including 6 crew members, sustained serious injuries, while 2 passengers had minor injuries. Miraculously, 4 of the survivors somehow avoided injury altogether. To survive a situation like this, it's very important to follow the captain's and crew members' instructions. They're trained for worst-case scenarios.
We train people to carry one of those black mega garbage bags with us. You can add hours to your survival by jumping inside the black garbage bag, pulling it up over you and your life preserver, and floating in cold ocean water. It will actually keep the water inside the bag warm enough for survivability.
I feel like that's like an unknown fact. That's a great survival tip.
In some cases, the captain isn't always able to fly the plane, especially when they're being sucked out of the cockpit. Before we fly into that story, make sure to like and subscribe for more incredible survival content. It's June 10th, 1990, and after an hour delay, British Airways Flight 5390 is finally about to take off. Captain Timothy Lancaster, co-pilot Alistair Atchison, 4 flight attendants, and 81 passengers are expecting a smooth flight from the UK to Spain. After takeoff, things are going well. The autopilot is engaged, both pilots release their shoulder straps, and Captain Lancaster loosens his lap strap. Then, all hell breaks loose. Just 13 minutes into the flight, with the aircraft over 17,000 feet, an unsettling noise catches the attention of one of the flight attendants, Nigel Ogden, who had just checked on the 2 pilots. The plane's windshield violently blows out. The cockpit door explodes off its hinges, and the entire fuselage feels like a wind tunnel. But that's not all.
The rushing wind pins Captain Lancaster to the roof of the cockpit.
Captain Lancaster is ripped out of his seat and is now pinned against the front of the plane. His legs are still hanging inside the cockpit, and Ogden rushes in to grab them, while co-pilot Atchison does whatever he can to regain control as the plane nosedives. Atchison contacts air traffic control, but he can't hear them due to the strong winds. Captain Lancaster's feet are also lodged against some of the aircraft's instruments, making it even more difficult for Atchison to regain control. The other crew members urge all passengers to fasten their seatbelts and remain calm. No one knows what is going on, but at such high altitudes, there isn't enough oxygen in the plane to last very long.
Now, at the altitude that they were at, explosive decompression is going to start happening, not only to him, but to the co-pilot and to the passengers. In order to get to an oxygen level that our bodies can perform at, you have to put on supplemental oxygen. As soon as this happens, the aircraft has got to get out of the flight levels, and it needs to get below 10,000 feet.
And while all of this is going down, Captain Lancaster is dealing with winds of 390 miles per hour and freezing temperatures.
We thought, either Tim's going to die or we're going to die, That was going through my mind.
Barotrauma is one where basically all the gas in our body tries to escape very quickly. So we can have ruptured basically our capillaries in our skin. are ear trauma, similar to diving accidents, can occur. So your ears can actually blow out. There can be bleeding in the ear. Lungs can also expand, and those can rupture as well. So you can see it's not a pretty picture for the person.
The pressure from the wind makes the weight of the captain feel like 500 pounds, and Ogden starts to lose his grip. Fortunately, another flight attendant, Simon Rogers, comes to help. At this point, they see blood on the side window and Lancaster hanging through the cockpit. For all they know, he could be dead. But the crew also knows that if they let go and his body flies into one of the plane's engines, things would go from bad to worse. Eventually, Acheson re-engages the aircraft's autopilot and brings it down to a breathable altitude. Now, he's tasked with landing the plane. In what some would call a miracle, the plane touches down smoothly and the passengers emerge unharmed. But the same can't be said for its captain.
British Airways Captain Timothy Lancaster is recovering tonight from a fractured elbow, frostbite, and the scare of his life.
Now I know what you're thinking. How the f did this happen? It turns out the windshield was replaced just 27 hours before the flight, and the replacement screws were slightly smaller than the originals. I mean, are you serious? This isn't IKEA furniture, it's a freaking plane. But this didn't stop the captain from flying, and he was back up in the air just a few months later. You know, after all these stories, I think I'm gonna start choosing trains and boats over planes to get around.
Being aware is number one. Keeping yourself aware of everything that's going on and being prepared for it, listening to the directions that are being told to you or have been briefed to you in advance. If you can keep a clear mind while the emergency is happening, and the best word of advice is do not try to egress or get out until the motion has stopped. So no matter what, don't try to get out of a moving aircraft.
Our final story proves why the brace position is your best way to survive a crash, even if the aircraft is engulfed in flames.
On the initial viewing of the aircraft hitting the ground and tumbling down the ground and a huge fireball and so on and so forth, we didn't expect to find survivors.
It's 1989, and United Airlines Flight 232, carrying 285 passengers and 11 crew, departs from Denver en route to Chicago. About an hour in, the pilots lose total control of the aircraft when a cracked fan blade on the plane's rear engine disintegrates. Flying debris breaks the 3 hydraulic lines and the mechanism that stabilizes the plane. Everyone on board hears a loud bang, and then the plane swerves to the right.
What was that? There was no alarms at all, no bells, no whistles, no lights flashing, just this big explosion.
That's when Captain Al Haynes and his co-pilot, First Officer William Records, realize both the autopilot and their manual controls are no longer controlling the aircraft. The crew is instructed to make an emergency landing at Sioux City Airport in Iowa, hundreds of miles from their planned destination. The captain and the first officer use the plane's thrusters to try to steer the plane, but it's incredibly delicate and exhausting. They know they'll need an extra hand to land safely. Thankfully, passenger Denny Fitch had flight experience.
I transitioned from a passenger to a crew member. And I remember their forearms and their tendons being tense. I remember their knuckles being white when I took it all in. The immediate, fast conclusion is, today is the day you're gonna die.
Fitch was able to direct the plane to the left toward the airport using the thrusters, which powered the 2 working engines, while the 2 pilots did their best to line it up with the runway. But without a way to physically slow the aircraft down, a significant impact was inevitable.
We were going way too fast, we had no flaps, we had no brakes, and we had no way to steer the airplane once we did arrive at the runway.
Let's just give that captain kudos. I mean, oh my God, what an amazing guy that was able to figure out that if he used different thrust levers, he was able to bring the aircraft down because that's how good of a pilot he was. He had raw basic flying skills.
The plane's right wing hits the ground first, and then the cockpit and tail break off as the aircraft bounces. The fuel causes the plane to explode, with flames engulfing various parts of the aircraft.
Didn't get it quite right. And we hit very hard.
Sadly, 110 passengers and 1 flight attendant died. The majority of the 184 survivors were seated in the section behind first class, but in front of the wings. Everyone in the cockpit also survived, despite having severe injuries. Most survivors assumed the brace position and tightened their seatbelts. It's believed this was a key reason why they survived.
But getting into a brace position isn't just something they print on a briefing card for fun. Thousands and thousands of hours of research go into survivability factors. Listen to the flight attendants' directions. Trust me, they are good.
Heads down, stay down.
They are loud and they are very active in saying, brace, brace, brace.
Following the crash, an investigation determined there was a manufacturing problem with the fan rotor, and human error was to blame, as an inspection of the rotor a year prior to the crash didn't detect any issues. To avoid this from happening again, future aircraft were designed to reduce the risk of a malfunction that would render all controls inoperable simultaneously. Now, I hope this video doesn't make you avoid flying, because statistically, it's safer than driving. With that being said, if you are ever in an emergency situation on a plane, listen to the crew, as they're trained in handling almost any situation.
Crashes are going to happen. They're just going to happen in vehicles, in trains, and boats and planes, and it's just a risk we take getting into a moving vehicle. But if there is a chance that it is survivable, we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can.
Oh, and remember how I said I want to stick to trains and boats earlier in this episode? Well, I thought about the Achetti train disaster and take back what I said. Flying may be safer after all. And check out our full-length video and you'll see what I mean. We'll see you next time on How to Survive.